I want you to picture a Thursday afternoon at your clinic. You've had a full day. Lunch got cut short by a walk-in. You dealt with a grieving client at 11, wrestled with a pissed off cat at 1, and at 2, you had a hard conversation about money that you really didn't feel like having. You weren't abused. Nothing went catastrophically wrong. It was, by the standards of our job, a pretty normal day. But it's home time, and you are absolutely wrecked. And then it's Friday, and you do it all again. I'm Hubert Imstra, and you are listening to The Vet World, where we are all about thriving, not just surviving. Here's the thing that I didn't fully appreciate about our job until I had this conversation that you're about to listen to. Our normal, your work week, it's maybe not that normal. And that's no longer just an opinion. There's a body here in Australia called Safe Work Australia that looks at risks in every profession. And they've got a view on what a full-time work week should actually look like when your job carries a heavy emotional load. Their number is 30 hours, not 40 or 45 or 50, 30. I sat with that for a while, especially the heavy emotional load bit. Because for most of my career, and I bet most of yours, a vet job was a pretty well-defined thing. Hours, duties, expectations. And if you couldn't cope, the conversation has been, maybe we're picking the wrong people to be vets. Maybe you're not tough enough. Maybe you're a bit of a snowflake. But what if that's the wrong conversation? What if the job itself is the thing that needs a second look? That's sort of where we go with this episode. It is about flexibility and job crafting and playing to your strengths without it becoming an excuse to avoid the hard stuff that is baked into vet life. It is about new laws that are changing what practice owners are legally required to do about psychological safety at work. Ultimately, it is about what some of this actually looks like on a Thursday afternoon in a real clinic with a real team. Our guest is Dr. Rebecca Farris. Rebecca is a vet who now runs the Australian Vet Association's Thrive program. Thrive is the industry's attempt to figure out how we make this profession a place people can actually stay in and enjoy, not just survive. She has been in the thick of this work for years, with a big community wellbeing survey running at the moment that you should definitely go and check out and do. There's a link to it in the show description. And Rebecca thinks about this stuff in a way that made me rethink a couple of things that I had taken for granted, including, honestly, my own skepticism around that phrase, psychological safety. So, to start, I wanted to ask Rebecca the question that I'm a bit obsessed with. As somebody whose sole job it is to help to create a profession that takes good care of the carers, if she could fix only one thing, one problem that gets in the way of vets thriving in this career, where would she put her time, her energy, and her money? Here's Rebecca.
Such a tough question, Hugh, but I decided to not think too much about it and just give you what comes to the top of my head, which is flexibility. I think we really need to have the ability to make our job work for us, not sort of try and fit ourselves into a preconceived mold. And I think, flexible, innovative workplaces are probably how we're going to get to that space.
Yeah. I think it goes a very long way. It's the square peg and round hole problem, right? For a long time when you and I qualified as vets, this was what a vet job looked like. And then you had all these different kind of people going, well, this doesn't work for me. And now we're starting to get to the point of saying, well, what does work for you and can we adjust? Are you seeing a positive change in that way in your own work experience since we last spoke, and then in the work you're doing? Are you finding that's becoming more of a reality?
I hope so. I'd like to get some real data on that, because I guess one of the things I'm learning as well is that, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, isn't it? So often we just hear what's going wrong and people telling us when they're not getting the flexibility, getting what they want. But I think there are plenty of people out there who are making changes and doing things differently that are working. And what we probably want to hear is more of those stories so that we can promote them. I think what I learned about since we last spoke, I've worked in sort of women's health area and more public health with humans. And it really highlighted to me how the systems within which we work can really affect us. And I think that, like you say, when we graduated, what a vet job looked like was probably very similar to maybe what it looked like 50 years ago. But society has changed and the way we want to work has changed and the way family structures have changed. But perhaps the vet job hasn't changed. And there was some discourse over the last few years of, we're not picking the right people to do that. And I find that really uncomfortable. I don't like that conversation. I don't think that we should be saying only one type of person can be a vet.
So just to clarify, the conversation is that we're choosing the wrong people to be vets. This is what the profession needs, and these are the people coming into the profession, and there's a mismatch. Is that what you mean?
That's what I've heard. I feel like I've heard in the past, and I found that quite offensive, but also quite it pushes you away. So, if it's not working for me, then there must be something wrong with me, and then I think that's going to contribute to our mental health problems and our attrition from the profession. So I think if we can flip that the other way to say, you're a great vet, which is what I hear a lot, but then how can we make sure that we actually make sure that you're thriving and able to be a great vet in this workspace? And I think the flexibility to play to our strengths, to job craft, to work that works for us is the conversations we should be heading towards.
It's interesting. The counter argument, or to play devil's advocate a little bit, and that argument that you just said, that has been an opinion expressed on this podcast, and very divisive, polarizing response to that episode. A bunch of vets, and classically older, and I put myself in that bucket of older vets, and very often in senior positions. So the leadership teams or the owners of practices going, thank goodness somebody's saying it, because we are doing our damnedest to change and adapt. But we've got all these snowflakes coming in, and every snowflake is special and needs a special role in the clinic, but the business has its needs. There are some things that have to happen when we have to talk about money to our clients. So you can't tell me, well, I don't like. So there's that opinion. And as a prior practice owner, I get that. I do have to run a business, and I have to deliver a service. And part of that service is there are clients, and sometimes people are shitty, and I have to charge money. And those are the needs for the business. And if that doesn't gel with you, well, maybe it isn't. Maybe private practice isn't for you. That's maybe the other discussion. The vet profession can be for you, but private practice has certain parameters. That's one argument. But I do agree with you that there are practices who are doing a great job of saying, okay, well, let's find a role for you. Where's your superpower? And let's focus on that and find other people who can do the stuff that adds friction to your day. So can we go too far with it, I suppose is my question.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. And I think that's a common misconception about job crafting or playing to your strengths, that it's all or nothing. And it doesn't mean avoiding or not doing things that are inherent parts of your jobs that you can't avoid, but it's finding those regular opportunities to do what does light you up. And also, when we're talking about flexibility, there's always that tricky conversation of, what's unreasonable and what's reasonable. I don't know whether I'm going to get the words right, whether it's a paradox or a conflict, but we're working in small businesses, and the business needs are important. And obviously being profitable is important if we want to get paid and have a reasonable quality of life. So I don't think playing to strength is not to say that we don't lean into areas of where we might need to develop or grow or learn. It's not at all about avoiding that. It's just thinking about what can we do that makes sure that everybody can participate equitably in the profession, and that we can do the things that light us up and promote the positive aspects. We were talking before about how fun the vet job is, and it can be really, really fun, and making sure that everyone's got access to the fun parts as well as maybe more of those drudgery parts.
Yeah. There's certainly some drudgery. But it's the same with any job. I think the expectation that it should all be fun. I don't think anybody really, I love what I do with my podcasting, with this stuff that I don't enjoy that much. But have you come across examples of how it's done really well? Like how a practice or a group made allowances for an individual to shine in their zone of power?
I think when we look at an example that's very general would be looking at the emergence of emergency clinics in metropolitan areas, which has allowed people to work at different times of the day. It may help around childcare, those sorts of things, and maybe focus on a particular area that they look at. Specialists definitely kind of gone down the pathway of playing to their strengths. And I think where business owners have been able to think differently about how they structure their day. So there are some business owners who've managed to focus on flexible workplaces and how they work for everybody, remain profitable. And in fact, we're actually having a little panel discussion with those business owners in May at the AVA conference. So just to try and hear those positive stories and find out more.
Quick plug here for the 2026 Thrive Wellness Symposium, which will be taking place at the AVA's conference in Brisbane, near my hometown. That kicks off on the 19th of May, 2026. I will be there hanging out, so come and say hi and hang out with Rebecca and her crew. Okay, back to the conversation. I think there's also an onus on the employed vet to be clear on what you want, because that's part of it. To just go, I'm not happy, fix it for me, is very unreasonable. But if you get to know yourself and go, well, these are the things that give me joy, and then communicate with the practice owner or your boss or whoever and say, how can we, well, a silly example, I'm back at GP practice now, and because of almost 2 decades in emergency, I've not done a lot of dentals. I don't have an inherent issue with dentals, but my skill level sucks. And because I'm not working a lot, I'm not spending a lot of time getting better at it. So now I really don't like doing them. I don't feel like I'm doing a good enough job. And I went to my employer and said, not saying I won't do them. If the practice needs me to do dental, I'll do it, but I hate them. So if at all possible, book me all the space, save the dentals, because my boss likes the dentals. So if you're happy to do those, but just being open with your needs and being reasonable about it, I think goes a long way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right here. And I think that's where I've come into thinking about the structure about it, because I agree. And I've had the same sort of experience and awareness, and probably the opposite. I actually really like dentals. And so I would love to do them. And when I've, raised that that's what I'd like to do more of, that opportunity hasn't been afforded to me because everybody else also needs to be able to do them and build their skills. And so there are lots of people out there teaching about well-being and self-awareness. And in fact, I'm part of that teaching to veterinary students. So they're identifying their strengths and learning how to tell people about them and think about how they might job craft towards them from a really early age. But if you're put into a system where you can't then have that conversation, so maybe you don't have the psychological safety to have that conversation, or when you do, you're told no, then that's the sort of system and the structure kind of stopping you, even though you've got that self-awareness to then actually make it happen.
Okay. Let's use that word you just said to take a slight left turn. You just said psychological safety. A bit of a buzzword globally, but certainly in our profession as well. And am I right in saying this actually, is it legislation or guidelines? There's some formalization about psychological safety in vet practices in Australia. Should we start with what it actually is and what it means for us?
That's absolutely great thing. I'd love to talk about that. So psychological safety is technically a sort of a feeling that's probably about the culture, how we feel. Do we feel that we belong? Can we be ourselves? Can we speak up if something's not right? Can we ask for what we want? And then psychosocial safety, which sounds very similar, or psychosocial health and safety, sounds really similar, is actually about the law. And actually what we found is that veterinarians don't necessarily understand those two terms very well, and that has led to what the flagship program for the AVA's Thrive program is our Cultivating Safe Teams. And that's an awareness training program initially. And after a pilot program of over 50 practices, we've identified that, that knowledge is really probably a bit low about those two terms. And so we have this awareness training to try to clarify that. And you're right, this is really important because the law has been changing. So all these things we're talking about, playing to our strengths, having flexibility, feeling included in your workplace, fall under the psychological safety part. And we sort of define that as what makes work great. So we've said when we can go to work and either do dentals or not do dentals, that makes us happier, more engaged in our work, and helps us thrive. And that's nice to have. And it would be wonderful if every vet clinic incorporated practices into their policies and procedures and the way of working that align to this. But it's essentially a voluntary thing. So that's something a great workplace might do. But then we have the law, which is, I guess, the minimum standard that keeps us safe. And the thing that's changed over the last few years is to explicitly state psychosocial safety as being equally important as physical safety, and that in most jurisdictions in Australia, there is actually an obligation to take proactive action towards creating a psychosocially safe workplace and, actually demonstrate that you've identified hazards and what you're doing to eliminate them where possible, and how you might mitigate them if it's not possible to eliminate them. So there's some, increasing stick to that. The carrot might be that when we do these things, we're going to be more profitable, we're going to have higher engagement, better retention of staff, better productivity, all these things. But there is now a big stick there to say that if you don't meet these obligations, you're breaking the law.
Which, as a practice owner, this all happened after I got out of my ownership practice. And a part of me went, oh, thank goodness I don't own a practice anymore, because this sounds onerous and scary and intimidating. And what does that actually look like? What is the minimum viable standard that the law expects of us as practice owners? What can you get in trouble for?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm certainly trying to keep up as much as I can. So don't quote me to the workplace spectres. But if we look at Victoria, who have been the last state to come on board with the model code of practice that's sort of set by the Commonwealth, they've been the last to come on board, but they've now probably enforced the most stringent rules and regulations. So if you kind of follow Victoria's lead, you're probably going to be okay if you're in any other state. And they have basically said that you must identify psychosocial hazards, and that should be done in consultation with your staff. So it shouldn't just be you ticking a box. You should be actually sitting down and talking and consulting with your staff about the psychosocial hazards in the workplace. And depending on what state you're in, there's up to 17 to 21 different psychosocial hazards that have been identified. And then you need to basically do a risk assessment and say, if I can eliminate them, I'm going to eliminate them, and this is how I'm going to do it. And if I can't eliminate it, this is what we're doing towards mitigating it.
So this is a requirement for every practice now. At some point, you have to go through this process to work with your team, identify them, eliminate or mitigate.
Yeah. So if you are a person conducting a business, that's the law, and it's the same as what you would need to do with physical health and safety.
Okay. So what, I'm not listing all 21 of them or however many there are, but what sort of things are we talking about when we talk about the identified psychosocial hazards in a vet practice?
Yeah, I think, well, an obvious one that probably most people maybe would think about would be bullying. Bullying is a psychosocial hazard. And things like workload, job demands, autonomy. So whether you have got a say in what you do each day or how you do your work, fatigue management, aggression and violence, sexual harassment. And then there's things like reward and recognition and growth opportunities, personal development, things like that will also fall into psychosocial hazards.
Okay. Maybe going into the nitty-gritty too much for practice owners is too much here, but where do you go? Like, can you go talk to the AVA, or are there programs or structured systems that help you go through this process, implement it, and get it in place?
Yeah, there's increasingly resources being provided by each WorkSafe regulator in each state. But what we sort of find is that, as you know, vets are pretty special. We like to learn with other vets, and we like to learn from our peers. And like you said, tell me about a practice that's doing something well. Well, we need to create that peer-supported learning where people can actually learn from each other about what works in a vet practice, because what works in other industries will probably work in a vet practice, but maybe we don't know what they are and all those sorts of things. So the first step, the AVA is actually, piloted this Cultivating Safe Teams awareness training, and that is now available as a 1 hour in-practice training session. So you can have this training with your team, and as part of that training, you'll actually walk away with a list of your identified psychosocial hazards. So tick, you've already met step one for the inspector's requirements. And then from that pilot, people said, yeah, well, we want to know more. So what do we do? How do we mitigate these risks? How do we identify them? And so we're actually in the process of piloting the next tier to that program, which is Cultivating Safe Teams Action. And that is going to start with a group of pilot participants who are going to work through implementing a survey with their team, how they can interpret those results, how they can develop a project to address one of the key hazards that you've identified, and then learn from each other about maybe what's worked in that other practice, what they'd like to try, those sorts of things. So we're trying to create the program that the profession needs to be able to address these changes in the law.
The cynic in me goes, it sounds like paperwork and tick boxes and bureaucracy, pain in the ass. Is it actually going to make a difference? Like, I know we want psychological safety, and I want to talk about that, of what I want. First of all, we'll clarify what an unsafe environment looks like. I care about that because I realize that's the thing. But this other part, it feels like a schlep. But I feel like if I was one of the employees and I was told, well, we've got to come in on your off day to do the psychological training thing because we've got to get this thing done, people are going to be unenthusiastic and unengaged, and it's going to be a time not the best spent. Am I wrong? Where am I wrong? I'm sure I'm wrong, but help me understand why this is important.
That's really interesting. And you're right. The success of any of these programs is always going to be driven by the leaders and their leaders' engagement. So we saw during the pilot, we saw practices who signed up for the pilot without their leaders even knowing. And so the employees actually kind of met in secret and had the training.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I think you can almost see that that's probably not a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah, don't tell the boss.
But it demonstrated that there is actually a really strong appetite for training like this. And once people did it, they were actually really blown away by how much they learned in a short space of time, how relevant it was, and how they all felt really committed. I think something like 98% of participants felt committed to take a pledge to create a safe team. The feedback that we got was just overwhelmingly positive. That's what they wanted. That's what they needed. Every practice should do this. So while some of them were a bit skeptical going into it about whether they would get anything out of it, afterwards they said, oh yeah, no, definitely worth it.
Okay, fantastic. So what do we get wrong as leadership teams? How are we creating psychologically unsafe environment? What are some common examples? What's happening? What shouldn't be happening in vet practices?
It's a really good question. And I wish I had my notes in front of you because I had the top hazards that came through from that training. But I guess things like workload is a huge one. And one of the things as leaders that might come out of that would be thinking about, are we balancing our need for profitability with our need for satisfying and actually effective workplace practices? I think there's less and less places now doing the 15-minute consult, but is there enough time to do the work that we've got coming in, and do we have enough resources to actually deliver the work that we need to do in the hours, the normal working week hours? Things like bullying and harassment, like, are we actually taking proactive action against bullies? Are we allowing that sort of behaviour to go unchecked? And it is an onus. It's really interesting. One of the things, I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question here, but just one of the parts of the training that's really interesting is we talk a little about the employer's responsibility, but also the employees. So legally, to create a safe environment, the employer has a duty, but so do all the employees. So once people see that, you start noticing that, they have a duty to, like you say, speak up if they need help and identify a hazard, but also they need to treat people with respect, not be a bully, be kind and civil to people. So once you see the responsibility as an employee, I think that can be a bit of a wake-up call that we're all in this together and we need to work together as a team to create that safe space and not just put the entire duty on the leaders. But what the leaders can do is to role model that it's important and that the time needs to be prioritised to have these discussions.
I like that. my skepticism is disappearing. Like when you say workload, and maybe the light bulb's just gone off for me a little bit in terms of the term psychological safety, because it can feel a bit woo. Like if you're a certain type of person of our generation, maybe I'll go psychological safety. Is that the snowflake thing? But what you just described with time management or workload, I think all of us are, but I'm certainly well familiar with the feeling of I am emotionally drained and stressed and anxious because the expectation is that I'm fully booked, and now there's a walk-in, and the workload just gets added to, and the receptionists are told, just book it in. Don't turn clients away. If a client calls, book them in. And I wear the emotional burden of that. And at the end of the day, I never would have said feel unsafe, but I certainly am not a happy camper. But a part of me that in certain work environments in the past I've been in, and it's an age and a confidence thing, but I certainly did not feel that it was within my right to go and say, this is not on. You can't book me like that. I was meant to have a lunch break, and you fucking booked that cat in with an itchy cat ear. But I didn't speak up. I just thought, this is the workplace. This is the vet job. That's what it entails. So it's great. It's interesting that's the top one, right? As workload, to say that's not psychologically safe is to overload your team.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's really interesting to pick up on what you said about the emotional side. So 72% of vet staff that were surveyed in our survey in 2021 said that they found the work emotionally draining. And it's been really interesting teaching vet students about emotional intelligence and things. But we talk about workload, we think about the physical work that we do. But the emotional work we do is also work. So when you're in all those interactions that you've just described, you have to now think about the receptionist doesn't want to, has got the emotional load of the person on the phone telling them that this itchy cat is an emergency to them, and they're trying to manage their emotions. And so they don't want to say no to you. And then they know that they're going to tell Hugh that he's going to go see the itchy cat ear when he hasn't had a lunch break. And so Hugh's going to be annoyed, grumpy, frustrated, angry, grumpy. So now I've got to manage those emotions. And then when you see the itchy cat, the cat's probably grumpy and emotional. So you've actually taken on a huge amount of other people's emotions in that work day, which is adding on to the actual physical or cognitive work that you're doing. And I don't know that we recognize that as work. And so when you dive into these psychosocial hazards and what Safe Work Australia has as recommendations, it's really quite eye-opening. And probably when you look at a job like veterinary medicine or even human medicine or social work, a lot of those jobs probably full-time should be 30 hours a week because of that emotional load that is also coming on. And so, I see your eyebrows raising there. How do we work 30 hours a week and get paid a decent wage that we can live on? And how can businesses remain profitable? So I don't think the answers are necessarily clear, and they're going to be different for every workplace. And that's where this discussion around consultation is important. Just because you've identified a hazard doesn't mean that the risk of it is really, really high. You might identify a hazard, but say it's low risk. In some places, it might be that high workload is high risk at some times, like maybe when people go on holidays or seasonally. And so you might mitigate that by getting in locums. Whereas other people might say this is a risk that is happening to us every single day. So now the frequency of that risk is meaning that it needs to be addressed sooner, and maybe with sort of bigger tools to mitigate those. And we might need to look at adding on more staff or having a policy about when we say no to people and how we do that.
Just circling back to the emotional side of the work, it's everything. I raised my eyebrows because I've been having increasingly this exact same thoughts. The physical work it's hard, but it's not the draining thing. Let me do surgery all day, or dentals if you like it, or something. It's kind of fun. It is the emotional part. And I said to somebody the other day, I find it really interesting having shifted from my two lives. I have my vet job and I have my clinical job. And I don't not enjoy the clinical work. But the day after my clinical shift, when I'm back in my office here, I am still not quite myself. I'm not, my vet work means I'm sitting at my desk editing and emailing and that sort of stuff. So it takes a lot of concentration and self-motivation. And the day after a clinical shift, I lack that. I don't have it because I'm drained. I'm emotionally drained from the day before. Even if it wasn't a terrible day, it's not that, stuff went wrong and I was overworked or something, but it is all of those client interactions. It's the phone call that's harder than actually the doing of the stuff. And it's different personalities can handle different levels, but I can't do a 40+ hour veterinary clinical work week anymore. I don't know if I ever did. Yeah. Maybe I didn't. Maybe that's why I hated being a vet for the first 5 years, because that's what I was doing. So I agree. I feel like there's a lot of the problems, and that's sometimes why it's frustrating, looking for solutions, because we're looking for Band-Aids. But I think a lot of it is actually a built-in, baked-in structural problem with how the vet, at least small animal vet profession, as a private profit-run business is set up. The two clash. But the business needs and what the people in the business needs, there's a direct friction built and baked into it. And I don't know the solution either. You're right. More money from somewhere is the solution. Because then added into that complexity is the solution is more money, but then that adds more emotional friction because we also want to provide a service that people can afford. So, don't know. Something to think about for our audience. How do we fix this?
And I think that's why it becomes really complex, and it feels like, oh, it's too hard. And in this role, like we're talking about all the ideas and how do we actually take action on them when just one person. And so I am trying to manage that frustration to say Thrive is an umbrella for a whole lot of programs, and there is yet so much more that we could be doing, but you can only do so much with your time. And what's the next priority? So looking at using evidence to try to drive what we're doing next and help find some of those solutions. And I was going to give a little plug for it. We're repeating that Thrive survey that was done in 2021. We're repeating that this year, and hopefully you'll be able to maybe put a link to it in the notes or something. But if you look out on social media for our Thrive survey, we want to find out, are these risk factors that were identified in 2021 still relevant today? Are things changing? Are people reporting improved conditions, or are things worse? And what sort of ideas or innovations do you want to see happen in the future so we can help drive advocacy for some of the systemic and structural changes that might impact vets' mental health? So, advocating to the government and regulatory boards about changes, but also what new programs could we deliver, and are the programs that we are delivering working? So that's the sort of stuff we want to hear about.
I'm going to interrupt here for a second to update you on all things VetVeld land. I'm editing this 3 days after getting back from Vets on Tour Maldives. I'm still a bit sunburnt, and I'm still trying to adjust to a life where I don't just eat great food and hang out with amazing new friends, surfing and snorkeling and listening to great lectures with a pina colada in hand. It's tough, but I think I'll make it. Now, I'm not telling you this to brag, but rather to give you FOMO, so that you visit our site at vetsontour.com to book your ticket for one of our next events, either in New Zealand in August or Italy in January. I've just been reading through the reviews for last week's conference, and I haven't seen happier emails in a long time. I promise you, you won't regret it. I will also add that as I was meeting all of these new vet friends, a lot of them asked me, "So where do you work?" To which I wanted to reply, "Seriously? How are you not subscribed to the VetVeld yet?" Which reminded me of two things. One, to ask you guys to tell others about us. Clearly, there are still people out there who haven't heard about the VetVeld. And two, it reminds me that I need to keep telling people not only about this podcast, but also our clinical VetVeld, where we have more than 650 episodes on all things small animal medicine, surgery, and ECC, each with fantastic show notes, a great community of subscribers, and a rapid search AI assistant that knows everything about all of our content. I have to say, and this time I am bragging, that when I sit in lectures during these conferences, I mostly have a feeling of, yeah, I knew about that. We covered that one in episode 212. Yeah, that was episode 184, which is a pretty nice feeling. Join our community and learn with us at thevetveld.com. Click on the clinical content button, and that'll take you to our subscriber-only podcasts. Okay. Back to Dr. Rebecca.
Back to the emotional load and that workload. So that's what I found really interesting. Once you read all these things and you see that Safe Work Australia looks at emotional load as being a psychosocial hazard that would make that job not be your full-time, look more like 30 hours than 40 plus hours. that goes back to that conversation again about, are we picking the right people to be vets? Well, when you look at that an organisation who's looking at all professions everywhere is saying, if you have a job with high emotional loads, full-time work is 30 hours. Does that allow a bit of self-compassion to ourselves to say, hang on a minute, if I can't hack it full-time, maybe there's not something wrong with me?
It's very interesting because I just said it before, for me at least, and I didn't think there was something wrong with me, but I just felt that's my nature, right? I did it, I coped, I didn't die, and I wasn't a mental mess, but I didn't enjoy it. I didn't
You're not
want to
thriving.
go. I wasn't thriving. I didn't want to go back to work after a holiday for sure. Versus now, I'm on the other extreme with my clinical work because I don't do a lot of work, but I actually don't mind going to work. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I haven't done it for a couple of days, and I have the energy to go and make a difference and do the fun things about vet science.
So what we want to do, I think, personally, it would be great if we could have more vets doing less hours, but that has to be financially viable for everybody. But being able to do the things that you love as well as the things that you don't love so much, I feel will be protective. But yeah, that's hard. That's not always possible in every workplace at the moment.
No. Let's talk about Thrive and get some more detail about the Thrive initiative from the AVA. So the website says Thrive is an industry-led veterinary wellness initiative that aims to support veterinarians and veterinary staff to lead satisfying, prosperous, and healthy careers, which kind of sounds like what I'm trying to do with the VetVault. We're on the same team trying to exactly satisfying, prosperous, and healthy careers. Happy vet life. Give us some more detail. What does it look like? What are you guys working on?
Awesome. I would love to do that. So, like I mentioned, the survey that was done in 2021 sort of kicked things off. And from that, people might know that as the Super Friends survey. They might have filled it out. I certainly did. That led to some recommendations being made, and the first of which was to create a bit of a steering group or committee that could help drive this. So we now have the Thrive Advisory Committee, and that's made up of a range of people with skills in this space. So whether it's as business owners, as mental health experts outside the industry, nurses, vets, all sorts of people. And they helped try to think about what could be, they developed a framework so that any initiatives or programs sort of fall in a framework. So we have 3 pillars, pretty common about most mental health frameworks, which is prevent, promote, protect. So we want to try and deliver programs that prevent harm. So our Cultivating Safe Teams program is the flagship for that. We're trying to prevent harm from unsafe work environments and promote the great things about work as the psychological safety parts. Then we have the protect. So the AVA has always had a employee assistance line or counselling line. So that falls under the Thrive umbrella, as well as then we have the graduate mentoring program, where we can connect experienced vets with newer and recent graduates. I would love to see that program expanded to be across the entire career trajectory if we can secure some government funding. So we also work closely with the advocacy team to be able to advocate for things like that. So for the federal and state governments to help fund programs like this so it can be expanded to everybody in the profession, not just AVA members. So the majority of Thrive programs are for everybody in the veterinary community. So that can be students, that can be nurses, that can be vets, it can be academics, people working in industry, anybody who identifies within the veterinary community. We also run webinars. We've had a Thrive symposium. So at the AVA conference for the last 3 years, there's been a day that's dedicated to Thrive topics. This year, it's going to be part of the mains conference program as a stream. So this means people can come in and out and learn about, like we said, we're going to talk about the flexible and family-friendly workplaces. We're going to have some updates on some suicidality data. We are also talking about how we might manage grief in the workplace. I did remember the other program that we have, which is the mental health first aid training. So again, vets like to learn from other vets. So we offer mental health first aid training that is delivered by someone from the veterinary profession, so that you're learning with other vets, not people from, corporate environments and maybe don't understand your day-to-day life.
Yeah. So what does that look like? Mental health first aid, is that when somebody is in crisis, that if you go through that training, that you'll be able to respond to that up to a certain point?
Correct. So it's just like physical first aid, where you're not there to diagnose, to cure, to do anything. You're just helping somebody in those initial stages before professional help can be sought. And so if someone's broken their leg or burnt themselves at work, it's kind of obvious to you that there's something wrong and that they need help. And you say, who's the first aid officer? Come and call an ambulance or get the Band-Aid or whatever you're allowed to do. But mental health is often invisible. So it's helping identify maybe some of the signs that you might see. I actually found, when I did it myself, I actually found it really useful for building my empathy and understanding of clients. I felt like I became a better vet after doing it, because it helps us understand where some behaviours might present with maybe some of the more severe mental illnesses like psychosis and alcohol and substance abuse and things like that, where I didn't probably know a lot about that. I think we talk a lot about anxiety and depression, but I learned a lot about those more psychotic disorders, eating disorders, things like that. But it helps you just identify some of the warning signs and how to have a conversation with somebody and where to refer them to so that they can get help. As well as, yes, if somebody was maybe in a suicide crisis moment, what you would do in that space. So, yes, super, super helpful, super practical. Not training people to be counsellors, not training people to solve their problems, but just helping identify and then get them into the right pathways for help.
I'm curious about your comment, how it helped you to be more empathetic to clients. So is that purely through the stuff that you learned about identifying mental health disease, that when you have a client that traditionally you would have called it a difficult client in inverted commas, where the default reaction is, oh, you're such an asshole. Now you to go and say, oh, I actually think you have X, Y, or Z, and I want to try and help you because you don't really have control about how you're responding to me. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think it was seeing those difficult clients through a different lens about what else might be going on for them. And again, we go back again to the structure. So sometimes those people need more time. They need more patience. They might need to be treated in a slightly different way and sort of actually opening up and allowing for that, rather than saying, well, I'm sorry, I don't have time to see you. I've only got 15 minutes and you have to do it this way. Kind of maybe accepting and leaning into that and saying, well, everybody really should have access to quality veterinary care, and I might need to adapt the way that I approach this consult to get the best outcome for both the patient and the client. Probably also being braver, having a conversation and asking people, are they okay? We can see a lot of the time that people's emotions are ripe when we're in consultation, or when we think about euthanasia or a difficult moment, and understanding that that might land heavier for some people than others, and ensuring that we're offering support, showing them where they could maybe get grief counselling, taking more time with them, adapting the way that we approach how we consult for them. So that's more inclusive, which circles right back to that psychological safety, that feeling like we belong is important, not just for our staff, but also for our clients.
Yeah, and also circles back to what we just discussed about emotional labor, because what you discussed there takes a lot of emotional labor, right? That's not you're not doing that back-to-back consults every 10 minutes for 5 days a week.
Yeah, that's right. And I think some people tend to, like they talk about GPs, that the female GPs tend to get more of the mental health consults than the male GPs. Maybe the same's happening in veterinary practice, that maybe there is a split with some of the people are getting more of those consults than others, and perhaps they are wearing more emotional load and might need to have more debriefing time or more breaks during their day than maybe someone who's in surgery all day and not talking to the general public.
So in your time working with Thrive, biggest wins for you personally, things that made you most optimistic? Have you had any big moments where you're like, shit, this is actually making a difference?
Oh, that's such a good question. I've just been sort of writing my performance review this recently, and trying to focus on that exactly for myself to say, okay, because sometimes it feels really hard when we're working on programs where the change that you're going to see maybe won't happen in your lifetime. You certainly need to sit down and celebrate the wins. But one of the things, my big win, I think, was applying for ethics approval for the Thrive survey so that we can, my hope is that that means we can publish the results and add to the academic literature in this space, and also hopefully then seed interest in further research and funding to research for about veterinarians' mental health, and more importantly, some of the solutions. The interventions that are put in place are often evidence informed, but not necessarily evidence based. So we don't know, do they actually work? We think they will, but do they? So that to me was a huge win. That was hard work, but I think will be well worth it. The other big win I had was onboarding a new committee and seeing the quality of expressions of interest that came in, the people who want to help and volunteer in this space and contribute to this conversation just blew my mind. It was so hard to choose 4 people to add to the committee because the quality of the applicants was so high. So that was really, really refreshing to see and just made me think, yep, this is worth it. We're going to work together. We'll chip away at this elephant, taking one bite at a time and see where we can get. But I've got good people behind me and supporting me.
It is so encouraging to see how many people do care about this topic. It feels like positive change. As you say, it can feel exhausting because you're pushing this stone up a hill and sometimes don't feel like you're getting anywhere. But I do feel like with the amount of interest and the amount of intelligent minds thinking about it, change is inevitable. Slow, but inevitable. So just to clarify, so the Thrive program, did you say this is for anybody in the profession? Is it just Australia-wide, or is it for AVA members, or who has access to it, and how do we access it?
So it's open access to anybody. It could be international, absolutely. But yeah, most of the things are available to everybody. And if you go to ava.com.au/thrive, you'll be able to see all our programs and events that are in place. And then AVA sort of supports this through some of the membership programs. So there are a couple of things like mentoring that are for members, but pretty much everything else you can access as anyone in the veterinary community. Some things are free, some things are paid, but it's pretty much equitable for everybody.
Amazing.
But yeah, go to ava.com.au/thrive. And then if you go to the programs and events tab, you'll see webinars there and it will take you to all the webinars. It'll also show all the webinars that we do. We keep on demand for a year. So one of the ones that's been super popular over this last year is the Neuro-Inclusion Matters. And so again, we're talking about psychological safety, how we can make sure that everybody in our community feels that they belong. So that was specifically talking about how our workplaces can make sure they're inclusive for people in our neurodiverse community. So that's been super popular.
That is one that I'd love to go and listen to. All right. Well, you can't get away without some of the standard questions. I've changed a little bit since we were last on. I've added the pass along question where I ask you a question from a previous guest who asked the question not knowing who the next guest is going to be. And this is something that I think about a lot. So the question for you is, what part of your workday, and for you could choose which workday you mean. Do you mean your workday in the vet clinic, or do you mean your AHAT workday? What part of your workday do you hope that AI automates? And also, what part of your workday are you hoping that it never touches?
Great question. And I think any administrative task AI can have, and I think we're seeing that already happen in the vet profession. So that's really good news. I think in my AVA role, automating payments. So we're just having to have nice, smooth ways that you can automate getting people to register and log in for things. That would be wonderful. And then the bits that it's the paradox of saying the bit that you can find really difficult can be, vets have identified that they found difficult interactions with clients as a huge psychosocial hazard. Yet I think I'd hate AI to take away the human interface ever and to stop me being able to talk to people. Like that's the bit that I want to get paid to do, is to talk to people. So I think I don't want it to take away that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have actually wondered about that, the difficult conversation part, if a good AI not the connection building part, but some of the, like the money conversation. I've actually really wondered about that. Can I have a AI that I say, okay, well, this is what I want to do. I'm going to let you talk to whatever. It's going to run you through money options. And if there's any issues, we can come back and discuss. I swear we can outsource that.
That's a great idea, because I think I've been really lucky in my career. I worked a really long time in an organisation that had a dedicated accounts person. And it was one of the policies was that the vets didn't have to have those conversations about payment plans. You could always bring in the accounts person. So the baddie was never the vet who's delivering the care. So that's not available in every practice and in small practices. So imagine, AI saying, great, I'm just going to run you through the costs of this procedure. That would be awesome. Great idea. I love it.
I know. But I agree with you. The trust building and the connection with the client, I think that's going to be our main job, one of our main jobs to a large extent. All right, your question for my next guest.
Yeah, well, I think it goes without saying I'm going to want to talk about thriving. It's my passion. So my question would be, what does a thriving veterinary profession look, feel, and sound like?
That's an unfair question. That's a big question. All right. The one bit of advice. You are at a large conference or on a popular veterinary podcast, and you have a minute or two to give one bit of advice for the veterinary new grads of the world.
Yeah, I did a talk on this a few years ago, so it still really resonates with me. Don't be afraid to ask for help and reach out. And from a leader's point of view, share your struggles and your stories so that everyone understands that it's may not just be them that feels the way they do.
Thank you so much for coming back again and for the work you're doing for Thrive. As I said, we're on the same team. We're moving in the same direction. And I'm glad I get the opportunity to talk about your work. And people go look for Rebecca and get involved, get engaged. I think that's, if I had to give one bit of advice, I've got many. Because I ask the questions, I often think about my potential answer. And one of them would definitely be engaged. Yes, there's problems. Yes, there's issues. If you disengage and just go, well, I'll just show up to work and get it done so that I can go home and do something else, it can feel like the right thing. It's a protective mechanism, but it's not the right way to, as I said in the subline for the vet world these days is fall in love with veterinary science. You're not going to fall in love with somebody if you disengage with them. Be engaged, join Rebecca's programs, do these things at your own practice, make it better for everybody else, and it will automatically get better for yourself.
Can I add on to that I think being engaged is super important. I didn't realize, and this is, I guess, thinking about this structure, sound like an AVA plug here, but I think the AVA actually offers a huge amount of opportunities to be engaged in the profession and to help drive those solutions and those changes. I didn't probably realize how many opportunities there were to get involved. There are so many ways to get involved that I didn't know about. And I think, I would like to just sort of raise that awareness to say, if you want to see change, get engaged, make your voice count and be part of the solution. Otherwise, you're just part of the problem.
Yeah, it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. Get in the game.
Yeah.
Before you disappear, I wanted to tell you about my weekly newsletter. I speak to so many interesting people and learn so many new things while making the clinical podcasts. So I thought I'd create a little summary each week of the stuff that stood out for me. We call it the VetVault 321, and it consists of 3 clinical pearls. These are 3 things that I've taken away from making the clinical podcast episodes. My light bulb moments. 2 other things. These could be quotes, links, movies, books, a podcast highlight, maybe even from my own podcast. Anything that I've come across outside of clinical vetting that I think that you might find interesting. And then 1 thing to think about, which is usually something that I'm pondering this week and that I'd like you to ponder with me. If you'd like to get these in your inbox each week, then follow the newsletter link in the show description wherever you're listening. It's free, and I'd like to think it's useful. Okay, we'll see you next time.